A quick joke attributed to Bob Saget. I told my girlfriend tonight when I come home, I want to make love to you badly. And she said, at least you don't overestimate yourself. I am Johnny Mac with your daily comedy news. Hope your holiday weekend is going well. The Toledo Blade caught up with Nate Bargatze, who said, I really look for any scenario that I think might be a funny story. I'm about to tape a special, so I'm looking and thinking within the act about what I already have. He's going to tape the new special on September 24th at the Celebrity Theater in Phoenix. The overall gist is not going to change, but I'm hoping to get a few words placed right. He says he's carved out a nice niche for himself by staying true to who he is. That's what makes it relatable. Some people told me, you have to get your energy up, because I'm on the low energy side, not very animated. I'm getting a little bit better at that, but I'm never going to be all over the place. I tried it before, and it would not always work. You just have to learn over time that the only way to be unique is to be you. When you're not trying to be yourself, it's a lot to keep up. It's not about figuring your voice out, but you get to know your voice a little bit better. You can phrase things in a way that everything is funny. I've been doing this for 20 years now, and I can kind of just build the act quicker than I could any year before this. The longer I've been in comedy, the more you know how to make something funny, more than I did 5 years ago. KTLA had a story about Jeff Ross, who roasted news anchor Sam Rubin, and he wasn't even here. Jeff Ross was on the KTLA 5 morning news, and he noticed Sam Rubin was absent. Jeff Ross said, where's Sam? Is he back at journalism school finally? One of the co-hosts revealed Sam was on a shoot at Disneyland. Jeff Ross said, is he one of the characters? I didn't know they had a smelly and a goofy. Ross said, I only roast people I love and have affection for and who I respect. He was asked who didn't take it well, and he said, one time B. Arthur held me down and beat the heck out of me. Ross is going to be part of the first annual Catalina Comedy Island on Catalina Island, a place I went to for the first time this summer, and I loved it. I even raved about it on my Travel is Back podcast. Let me look up what episode it was for you so you can go listen to that when we're done here. Episode 50. It's titled Catalina Island is Everything and a Must Do. I know you West Coasters are like, yeah, we know. Look, man, I'm from Queens. I don't know. I went there for the first time. Catalina Island is awesome. And the first annual Catalina Comedy Island on Catalina Island will feature Jeff Ross. He'll be on stage with Dave Attell. Also on that bill, Michelle Wolf. That's September 9th. Dana Carvey and company will do stand-up on September 10th. That's this weekend. Chappelle said, if you think you have thick skin, volunteer during our Bumping Mike show. If you can make that, like Jeff Ross, Dave Attell, Michelle Wolf, Catalina Island, that's a great combination. From the Daily Beast, Kids in the Hall's Dave Foley came, quote, very close to meeting a tragic end. Foley was on the Last Laugh podcast. He talks about why so many comedians have grim backstories and traces the contentious history of Kids in the Hall, recalls the best audition of his career, which was for the role of Michael Scott on The Office, and reflects on working with outsized personalities like Andy Dick, Joe Rogan, and Phil Hartman. I haven't listened to this yet, but you know what? I'm actually recording this on Friday, and I'm going to the beach, so right now, as I'm kind of vamping here and talking into this microphone, I'm downloading this to listen to. Done. I also see there's a Henry Winkler episode. Grabbing that too. So on the podcast, apparently Foley says, comedy has been my life for more than 40 years, and I've certainly seen a lot of the dark side of comedy over the years. He was explaining how he became the narrator for Vice's docu-series, which examines the fall and rise of icons like Chris Farley, Roseanne Barr, and Richard Pryor. Foley says, I think I've come very close to being the subject of the series. I'm glad I did, and I'm glad I'm still alive. About 7 years ago, he landed himself in the ICU after passing out drunk and cracking his head open at a party in downtown LA. Foley says, that was a dark time. I'm lucky I got through it. He stopped drinking and taking prescription drugs after the accident, but he says the head trauma actually seemed to reorganize my brain a little, and that I stopped having an urge to drink, which was more important. What about the future of the Kids in the Hall? Foley says, regardless of what happens with the series, I think there's going to be more Kids in the Hall stuff down the road just because we're all really proud of the show we made, meaning the new season on Amazon. The interviewer commented that it's unusual that all 5 of the group's original members are still committed to the lifelong comedy project, and Foley says, yeah, and still alive. Let's face it, it's a ticking clock at this point. The odds are good that one of us won't be around much longer. Well, I don't want to hit the break on a dark note, so how about this from WhiskeyRiff.com, your home for comedy news. They caught this joke from Dusty Slay that I've been cracking up about for about a week. Dusty Slay tells it much better than I ever could, but the setup here is they're talking about the song by Alan Jackson and Jimmy Buffett, It's 5 O'Clock Somewhere. I'm sure you've heard the phrase, It's 5 O'Clock Somewhere, and if you're a parrot head, you definitely know that song. Dusty Slay said, I do like that song, It's 5 O'Clock Somewhere, though. There's a line in the chorus where he says, it's only 12:30. That's 12:30, just to be clear. He said it's only 12:30, but I don't care. It's 5 o'clock somewhere. That's not true. You know what I mean? It might be 5:30 somewhere. Some podcasts I have listened to that you can check out, the Carson podcast. So this is a long-running podcast talking about all things Johnny Carson Tonight Show, and it's the last episode. I was so sad to hear it was the last episode, but the host mentioned they were like 400 in, and I'm like, yeah, at some point there's nothing left to talk about, and even in the last, 50 episodes or so, it was sort of winding down. It was, it was one thing when you could have like major people on, and then it was kind of like, hey, you ran the lights for 2 weeks back in 1974. What was Johnny like? But I really like the podcast a lot, and the final episode is fantastic. The guests on the Carson podcast are Dana Carvey and Robert Smigel. Very, very fun. I was listening to that on the long run last week. Highly recommended. Also on that same long run, I listened to Bert Kreischer on with Bill Maher. I think there's part of me that just viscerally wants to go, I don't like Bill Maher's podcast. And most weeks, I kind of really like Bill Maher's podcast. It's interesting. If I had to pick between one of the two, I'd suggest you listen to Carson with Dana and Smigel. But Bill Maher with Bert Kreischer also should be on your list. George Lopez news. It's a new book. It's a middle-grade adventure story set in rural New Mexico and authored by George Lopez and Ryan Callejo. It's called Chupa Carter. The story follows 12-year-old Jorge, who's unhappy about being sent to live with his grandparents in a fictional New Mexico town, but Jorge quickly makes friends with a lost chupacabra named Carter. They face mythical creatures and an even more frightening middle school principal. No quotes from George Lopez promoting this one. But Ryan Callejo said, a lot of times, George will recall a hilarious story from his childhood and we'll run with that. I want to know what's going on with George Lopez tacos. He was so into that for a while. Tom Segura was on the Good One podcast. They said, in the past few years, especially post-Trump, certain comedians have given their specials edgy names like Triggered, spent a lot of their act bragging about how they're so edgy. You've avoided that, Tom Segura. Segura said, in comedy, you hear a certain premise or a topic addressed, you're like, it's been covered. So I really just try to stick to my jokes, my observations, my stories. I try to get fuel for everything I'm saying from what's actually happening that's observationally unique to me. That whole self-satisfied thing, I've seen it too. I've had my own touch of it 5 or 6 years ago. You can't say these words, but you can say all these things. What happens is everyone's going to yell at you, and maybe that's not going to be enjoyable. But the reality is you can definitely still say the wildest stuff. It's just that people are going to F and scream about it, and that's the new part. And from Fringe's first full-on deaf comedian is a giant leap for BSL signers. The comedian is Gavin Lilly. Chortle writes, stand-up is most interpreters' nightmare, slippery, speedy, splenetic. What does splenetic mean? Am I weird? Are you guys like right now, like, how does Johnny Mac not know what splenetic means? It's an adjective. It means bad-tempered or spiteful. You can use it as such, a splenetic outburst. Who knew? Stand-up is most interpreters' nightmare, slippery, speedy, and splenetic. Even tightly scripted gags frequently rely on wordplay and tone of voice, as untranslatable as it gets, so it's been groundbreaking to see the Fringe's first full-on deaf comedian this year. The capital D here signifies membership of the signing community. Lowercase deaf comedians have similar levels of hearing but perform in English. Lily's Breathless Hour is entirely in British Sign Language, the aforementioned BSL. While interpretation into spoken English reassures listeners, much of his material reflects the principle of universal design. Hearing and deaf viewers alike can watch and empathize. But the nature of Lily's stories from inside Deaf Life matter. He riffs on the advantages of being deaf and legitimately ignoring the hearing world's foibles. He celebrates the ease with which deaf people travel the globe, knowing they can make themselves understood after a lifetime of gestural invention and massed impatience at hearing haplessness. He satirizes the ridiculous thoughtlessness of hearing good intentions, like when the airport staff irrationally call for wheelchairs when a deaf customer shows up. Lily teases hearing folks' inability to follow the direction of a pointing finger, something any deaf person learns to do unerringly from the cradle. Deaf bodies are engineered for faultless laser-like coordination of eye and hand. If you think you can read body language, not having to waste time listening, deaf people watch like hawks. Ally such observational prowess to the fidelity of deaf physicality, the result hits funny bones you never knew you had. That's a great review. And that is your comedy news for today. Follow the show for free on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, and I'll see you back tomorrow.